If you run a company or manage a team, hiring qualified people quickly can make or break your business. Imagine a position of need going unfilled for weeks or even months because you just can't seem to find the right candidate. When it comes to hiring, Indeed is all you need. Stop struggling to get your job post seen on other job sites. Indeed sponsored jobs help you stand out and hire fast. With sponsored jobs, your post jumps to the top of the page for your relevant candidates so you can reach the people you want faster. This makes a huge difference. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs posted directly on Indeed have 45% more applications than non-sponsored jobs. Plus, there's no monthly subscriptions, no long-term contracts. You only pay for results on your job post. Just in the last minute that I've been talking to you, 23 hires were made on Indeed, according to Indeed data worldwide. Now that is fast. There's no need to wait any longer. Speed up your hiring right now with Indeed. Listeners will get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/BWN. Go to Indeed.com/BWN right now to support this podcast. Indeed.com/BWN. Terms and conditions apply.
From your favorite source for Chicago White Sox talk, delivering news, interviews, analysis, and more. This is the Sox Machine podcast with your hosts, Jim Margulis, James Fegan, and Josh Nelson.
Thanks, Rob, and welcome to the Sox Machine podcast. I'm your host, Josh Nelson, and it's Monday night, February 3rd, 2025, as we record this new podcast. It's Prospect Week at Sox Machine, our annual weekly event, or I should say it takes over the entire week at Sox Machine, where we take a deep dive look at the health of the White Sox farm system, which feels a bit like deja vu doing this in 2025, as we White Sox fans just went through this experience of getting hyped up for how many prospects were the top 100 lists. Is anyone excited that the White Sox have a large group of prospects on many publications' top 100 list now? We'll discuss that, plus PECOTA projected the White Sox to finish 61 and 101. An umpire gets fired for betting. Dylan Cease could get traded again this spring training. Opening Day Eve 2025 announcement, and the new Sox Machine Fantasy Baseball League format. So let's get started. Joining me are Sox Machine beat reporter James Fegan and managing editor Jim Margulis. And Jim, happy Prospect Week at Sox Machine. This is like your baby. You run the course here, getting us hyped up for prospects before James makes his way down to Glendale to start covering spring training. Valentine's Day, February 14th, is college baseball opening day. So for those that want to track the MLB draft and the college prospects, you'll be doing that with me weekly coming up here. But prospects, what should Sox Machine fans expect to see this week?
Yes, Prospect Week, a celebration / way for us to easily fill the last dead week of the content season before spring training arrives, and we only have half a week of awkward spacing to try to figure out exactly what to say. So that's why Prospect Week exists for Sox Machine. But yeah, it catches the White Sox at a curious spot because they are well regarded as a farm system. Right now the organization rankings are being rolled out. Kylie McDaniel at ESPN has them second. Keith Law has them 12th. And of course, people might expect Keith Law to be the low man on the White Sox system. And I am arranging the annual chat with Keith Law to get his thoughts about it. But you can see the argument from both sides because, as you've mentioned, White Sox fans have been here before and getting excited about the system. And I think, more than getting excited about the system or apprehensive or skeptical, cynical, etc., it's more a time to feel intrigued just because enough has changed under the hood. Enough has changed with the information that's being relayed down the chain. Enough has changed with the people implementing it to be, have more of a mindset of let's watch this play out, or continue, but watch yourself, counselor. Like that kind of approach to what the White Sox are doing, not like buying what they're selling without seeing proof, but letting the proof come in, because they actually are making the changes that other teams have done, a long time ago. Before, during the Rick Hahn administration, is basically like, once we get as many good prospects as we need, we'll be set. Like that seemed to be their approach. We just need to, sell off our best players, restock the farm, and then we'll be good. We'll have figured it out. Like, positive inertia will happen, and, we won't be stopped. And then it turned out they just got like a one-ply amount of depth at every position. And so like superficially, a good roster. Once disaster started to strike, or once one position started to falter, everything kind of caved in with it, because there was just no way to pivot. There wasn't enough depth to either lean on internally or trade away to help supplement the roster. So it does seem like Chris Getz has a better idea of what went wrong the last time, as he should. That should be the reason why he was hired. It's just a matter of, it's hard to do while the season's going. And like, you have to get this right, because if you don't get this period right, then you might be kicking the can for another 2 years. And that's now, you're talking about 5 years of failing. And you have all sorts of things like, the lockout threat and the stadium lease ending, just like all sorts of unpleasant business concerns that start to pile up here. So it is in his interest and everybody else's interest to get this right as soon as possible. So I think I'm taking the approach of sitting back, taking inventory of what the White Sox have, what they showed last year, and then seeing what the changes they have touted might possibly do, and then tracking whether those changes and whether those impacts have actually occurred.
James, is this on Paul Janisch, on his shoulders, as far as the development side of this farm system, to make sure that the guys that are in the top 100 eventually get to Chicago?
Probably less so than we were thinking about Chris Getz, when they were doing the situation last time. And that's kind of, there were good hires and good pitching coaches I talked to. Matt Zaleski was part of, developing Dylan Cease, and now he's a pitching coordinator. There's holdovers from like the start of that regime, but kind of like he was the one agent of change in the player development department. And I don't think that's the case with Giannis when you have Bannister overseeing pitching and Phil overseeing hitting, and like Barfield having input. And it seems like he's more part of a larger systemic approach. So yeah, the buck stops with him, so to speak, when you're looking at the farm as a whole. But I don't think it's a Paul Janisch save us type of situation where it was kind of like with Getz coming over, it's like, oh, maybe this is the guy who will like trigger a lot of changes, as opposed to just being someone who's viewed as pretty sharp and was someone that Josh Bradfield had been kind of eyeing for this role for a long time, but he's just kind of a part of a lot of organizational shift. Whereas you kind of Getz was kind of like any hire of the White Sox during that time, where it's like, well, maybe he can change everything. And gets a lot of momentum going if he has some success, the way they wanted like every manager to bring over what some other team was doing, please, and have it take reach and take hold of the organization somehow. So yes, and also no.
Got it. Yeah, because the reason I ask is because, to Jim's point, James, like these pitfalls that impacted the last rebuild. Now, granted, all those top 100 prospects, obviously not all of them panned out. The White Sox did make to the postseason back-to-back seasons for the first time ever in franchise history. They did get a division title out of having, at one point, it was more than like 8 prospects in the top 100, if my memory serves me right. Even guys like Carson Fulmer and Zach Collins were top 100 prospects at one point for the Chicago White Sox. But to avoid that, because after, Jim's point, the one-ply depth, the collapse, we saw what we saw the last 2 years. To avoid these types of situations 5-7 years down the road, it seems more collaborative now as far as to identify what didn't work, and us, the White Sox front office, trying to fix that.
It seems like a lot more when you see someone is drafted. Especially this year, the integration of Bannister and like any pitching project they took on kind of running through like a template that they thought could work, which is I think is the way a lot of teams have probably operated in the past. Certainly something the White Sox wanted more of. But yeah, it seems like there's a type of profiles that they're looking at, or basically how any kind of small minor league acquisition, and this is more like depth guys than prospects, has had the you knew Fuller was kind of on board or had a plan mapped out for him or an idea when they were acquired. So I think there's a bit more connectivity in terms of who they're bringing in supposed to fit a model that they think can succeed, or at least understand what they need, rather than being more hodgepodge. But remains to be seen, I think, on that front. I don't think we're at the point where we can look at the way, unless you really want to like count your chickens with like Noah Schultz or something like that. Count your eggs before they hatch, whatever. It's a little early to like tout like the objective results of this and say like, well, clearly it's a lot of, as much as like it sounds convincing and it's sounds a lot more robust than it has been in recent years. Like I can't tell people like it's definitely going to work before it does, because covering the White Sox, even if all the explanations sound more studious and convincing than they did 3-5 years ago, just the pain of covering last year, I'm looking for reasons why things won't work when I expect them to, more than vice versa. So yeah, everyone sounds like they're talking to each other and there's more synergy than before, but I watched 21 loss season, and I watched the thing fall apart with alarming speed. I understand where the fan base is at in terms of wanting to have a reason to really believe.
And Jim, I think you posed the question right away on Sox Machine. If you guys haven't gotten a chance to read Jim's column, I recommended that kicked off Prospect Week. And it is something that's swirling in my mind. Like, are the White Sox actually developing prospects, or are they just acquiring them again? Because the last rebuild, I don't know if I could pinpoint someone that they really developed that ended up being like a star or a good role player for the White Sox. Because PECOTA, Kopech, Giolito, Lopez, Dunning to a certain extent, and of course Eloy and Cease, like these were guys that they acquired from other teams. They were doing most of the heavy lifting as far as developing. Well, maybe I guess you can count Dylan Cease because he was still pretty young, right, James? Like when the White Sox got him, he was down in high A.
He was in low A when he started, and he was pretty high risk at the time. I mean, you could even say Kopech was. I mean, at this point, he's a reliever, but like there was, some reliever risk with him was that he would just never throw strikes and thus not really be an impact reliever in the majors either. So they had some credit in terms of like pitching depth of getting some of these hard throwing guys to at least throw strikes. He still needed the tweak he needed in the majors. That obviously came via Ethan Katz, and Kopech didn't really hold form. But and as much as I think he gets dismissed a lot because, he's an exceptional prospect, is a unique situation, but I don't think we can just not give him credit for Luis Robert. He's someone that they, signed and went through literally every minor league level, was pretty raw. Like obviously he worked with outside people as much as any prospect does at this time. And obviously kind of just talented his way to the majors before like some more significant refinements had to come. But like, he's someone that they produced. You get credit for kind of the plug and play ones as well. If they reliably required plug and play guys who just talented their way to the majors with seemingly little development, that would be a strength that they would draw upon. But they didn't. But they get credit for Robert, I feel.
Yeah, I think like the thing with Robert is he's just somebody they can't acquire again the way they acquired him. So like he's not somebody you don't talk about because he was a guaranteed stud, but more just because like they threw a amount of cash at him that is no longer allowed. And so like that, if that avenue were still open, like sure, the White Sox should do that again. But they can't, as we saw with like the Roki Sasaki thing. When those situations pop up, like you have to be lucky, and then those players have to want to come to you after a certain point because the amount of cash is minimal. You're talking maybe like $1 million or so differentiating the top two teams, and it comes down to whether that's the best place for them. But talking about like role players, I think it's really about like Aaron Bummer, Adam Engel, like being maybe like the off the radar prospects who actually like hung around and contributed to like a meaningful degree. But also, like we saw with Adam Engel, like they relied on him way too much and asked him to do too many things and absorb too many plate appearances that he shouldn't have gotten. And Aaron Bummer was, good, but sometimes frustrating, or, he's reliant on his defense and positioning not being what it was. And I think we saw with Atlanta last year that he's like a good reliever. When you put him with a normal team, like he's a good reliever, but has some flaws that can be taken advantage of. And so like, you don't want him coming in with runners on because they might steal on him, or like if you need if wild pitch is devastating, like he might have a sinker bounce away or a slider bounce away, but like medium leverage for the amount he's being paid, sure, good contract. Take him on. So I think those are the prospects they developed from off the radar. But in terms of, contributors, either frontline or, adequate everyday players, those came from either the top tier prospects that they acquired with either first round picks or very good players who are proven major leaguers, or they got them through free agency.
Yeah, because that's the question that I would like after going through Prospect Week here at Sox Machine. I would like to at least try to answer for myself, because like the number of top 100 prospects, is that moving the needle for you guys? Like the White Sox have 5 guys in MLB's top 100 or 6 guys in ESPN's. And I think for Keith Law, they only have 4. Like, Jim, does that even move the needle anymore after the previous rebuild? Because my initial thinking is it doesn't this year, because Kyle Teel and Brady Montgomery came at the cost of trading Garrett Crochet, and your top 2 prospects are left-handed pitchers and your first-round picks, which is fine with Noah Schultz and Hagen Smith. But are the White Sox really developing any guys to merit to be in the top 100? Outside of maybe Edgar Caro and Colson Montgomery, and there's heavy debate about Montgomery's place in the top 100.
Like Noah Schultz is a legit success story thus far. Like he's done everything he can do under the program he's been throwing to make himself a very impressive prospect. So I think he counts. Everybody else, like Hagen Smith, is wait and see.
Braden Montgomery's wait and see.
Yeah, excited to wait and see. Braden Montgomery is more of an open question, wait and see. I think it's more important that they're top 100 prospects just because that helps the Garrett Crochet trade pass the smell test. Like if they only had 3 top 100 prospects and you knew who they were, Smith, Montgomery, Schultz, Caro, select from that group. And they had traded Garrett Crochet to be like, oh, this is a team in trouble. So it helps provide some credibility. But I think last rebuild, things are so lined up to be where you could piece together a fairly convincing lineup for 2021 in like 2018. And maybe a free agent here, and but otherwise you could say like, oh, that guy's gonna be your shortstop, that guy's gonna be your third baseman or second baseman. We have a center fielder. We just signed a catcher. We'll just have to get a right fielder. How hard can that be? Finding an adequate right fielder. Surely one of these will pan out. But it is pretty like easy to kind of line everything up and say, yeah, this is going to be our team, and understand how it all came together. This is a little bit lumpier in that you have like 2 catchers being top prospects and they can't play at the same time, obviously, unless they're DHing. Maybe that takes a spot away from a bat, and you have some infielders, but maybe not a true shortstop, and you have an outfield, but maybe you don't. So it'll take more time to either, have these prospects like the Montgomerys turn up and maybe handle the tougher positions like shortstop and center / right field. And if they do, that's awesome. But I think if, one of them takes a lesser role than what was hoped for, then I think it gets a little bit trickier. And that's when it comes down to, okay, now you got to develop some guys to make up for Colson Montgomery being closer to Kyle Seager than Corey Seager, even though Kyle Seager is good, but just in terms of like, the kind of the, star player who's going to make $200 something million versus, a guy who's going to make 100 million, which is fine. But in terms of banking all your hopes and dreams around him, like you're going to need a little bit more.
Yeah, I feel like this is a pretty critical year in player development for the White Sox, because pretty soon, if not the end of this year, definitely 2026. I mean, Noah Schultz seems like he'll be ready to join the majors. Hagen Smith, if he has a very strong first professional year, especially with his experience pitching in the SEC, he could be someone that could join the rotation. And then the clock starts. Like, you have these guys 4 to 5 years until you have to make a decision. Are we good? All right, let's build around them. Are we not good? Well, we got to make 2 more Garrett Crochet trades and kind of kick the can down the road again. So pretty important year for the White Sox. And again, Prospect Week on SoxMachine.com. Check out all the work that we posted throughout the week. And speaking of prospects, James was able to attend this past weekend a prep baseball event hosted by Prep Baseball Report. Very good publication, especially when it comes to charting how high school players are faring throughout the country. They host these events, inviting scouts to come both collegiately and professionally to see these players perform numerous drills, very similar to Perfect Game. So James was there. So James, how was Super 60?
Like any median American, I enjoy watching baseball practice for 7 hours. So it was what I wanted. I wish going to a game was more like this. But yeah, it was good. I previously had done kind of a travel baseball tournament as a way to like get used to like the mechanics of high school scouting. This was a bit easier because pretty much everyone was good. Everyone's going to like almost everyone's going to a Power 5 program, and even like the ones they're going outside at like Wichita State, like still pretty good. Like everyone there, like a kind of measurable level of like clear like upper level talent. And so it's more about scrutinizing, like, is this someone who would ever get picked in the draft? Because obviously to the average high schooler who gets picked in the draft is because it's, they're willing to go over slot for them and really do something to pull them out of a commitment to a college like this. So most of them were like no's, but all of them were interesting and very much like a lot of guys you could see putting up big college numbers and being more interesting in 3 years. A lot of high school kids are very physically developed now. There are a lot of 18-year-olds who are just very jacked that you kind of like note being like maxed out. You sent me, I don't know if I'd say maxed out, but you said me about your highest rated prospect who was there was Elijah Green. That's a guy who lifts weights. That's a body you could probably project power on. He's kind of a funky operation as a switch hitter. He's like really high elbow setup, especially left-handed side. You just see them like do 2 rounds of BP, so you didn't really see him like get really synced up. But I was like watching it next to a scout, and I was like, oh, I don't know, it's a little out of sync. It's kind of an unorthodox swing. And he's like, yeah, I said that. Then he raked all summer. So I think there's like a degree of everyone at the showcase is very like, we're at a showcase. We're here to check in on like prospects that we're very familiar with, because like all these guys are like in this area. There's some people from like the South, especially one dude, Caleb Barnett, who's from Alabama, looked really good and probably will get a lot stronger because he's like 6'6" and rail thin, but was like putting up a lot of triple digits exit velo wise. But they're just kind of physically checking in with like a lot of prospects that they're familiar with and not making a lot of judgments. But it was funny when there's like these, oh, I'm at a showcase moments, which the big swings you kind of expect in BP, but the best ones when they started doing like defensive drills and like they're there to show off their arm. That's basically all they do in the drills, field the ball and throw it. And some of them were like, and most of them eventually got to the point of like, oh, I should just do a normal throw and complete the play. But a couple of them, especially the first round, be like, here comes the biggest throw you've ever seen, and just throw it like airmail like the first baseman by like 15 feet, hit the back wall, it goes green everywhere. The scouts just start laughing like, what are you doing? one guy doing outfield drills.
I'm just picturing like the Philip Seymour Hoffman, like make it rain.
One dude who was doing outfield drills, like almost like threw it into like the second floor concourse like twice. It was cool. Yeah. Saw a lot of guys who might throw 100 pretty soon. Already sitting 96 as a 17-year-old. Pretty crazy.
Yeah, the exit velocities, the throwing velocities, this is where it starts. So for those that are listening, if you got teenagers that are into baseball, again, you can go to Prep Baseball Report. They have these showcases. Of course, Perfect Game has a ton of showcases as well. But yeah, the type of data that we're getting, the type of data that professional teams are getting, to James's point, even if these kids do not get drafted and they go to college, they can chart their exit velocities and throwing velocities all the way from like age 14 now throughout college. So when it comes to draft day, they have several years of data to make a more educated decision on how they have progressed and how they have improved in some key metrics. But again,
yeah, one of my favorite jokes of the weekend was a scout pointing at the TrackMan unit and saying, "Have you met my national cross checker?"
That's funny. That's depressing, but also funny. That's a good joke. Sox Machine, along with their friends from the 108, will once again be hosting Opening Day Eve on Wednesday night, March 26th at the Remova Theater. Located in Bridgeport, the Remova Theater is where we'll host our live podcast previewing Opening Day, making our bold predictions for the 2025 season, and the typical silliness that comes with plenty of hashtag 108ing. Doors open at 6 p.m. The show will start at 7:30. Remova will feature new beers from their tap room, and you have to try the terrific food from the Remova Grill. Tickets are $20 plus fees in advance, and it will be $25 day of the event. To purchase tickets for Opening Day Eve, visit this website, removachicago.com/shows, and click on the Opening Day Eve link for March 26th, or you can also click on the purchase link for this podcast post.
Welcome to Nada Yada Island.
Next on Metro's Nada Yada Island podcast.
I almost fainted when the 4 new bombshells arrived. 4 free Samsung Galaxy A16 5G phones at Metro.
No way.
And finding out the 4th line is free? Oh, things got heated.
That's wild. Join Metro and get 4 free Samsung 5G phones. Only at Metro.
Plus tax. Bring 4 numbers and an ID and sign up for any Metro Flex plan. Not available currently at T-Mobile or been with Metro in the past 180 days.
Moving on. More projections for the 2025 season. Our friends over at Baseball Prospectus released the PECOTA projections, and the Chicago White Sox, according to PECOTA, will finish 61-101 in 2025. A 20-game improvement. There's nothing to complain about, Jim, right?
You fools! That was my initial reaction. Like, you're doing it again. Then you have to realize like how bad a team has to be in order to project to lose 101 games. Like that used to be severe. Anytime you saw 100 losses for a team, you'd think like, oh, that's awful. There's no hope there. And indeed there isn't. But just when after a 121 loss season, it just blows the doors off any concept of like what's normally awful and into a whole different layer of the earth that you didn't think you'd ever dig down to. And that's kind of where we're coming from with the White Sox.
James, what were your first thoughts looking at the PECOTA projections? I know you mentioned that you were chatting with some people at Baseball Prospectus to get a better understanding. Because, again, for listeners, it's 1,000 simulations of the upcoming season, projecting playing time for the guys that are currently on the White Sox 40-man roster. And that's the most common projection or simulation is the White Sox finishing 61-101.
I mean, my first thought was obviously swapping out Deloach and then Amaya. You got to basically throw out your results so the formulas all change.
Sim it again.
So I wait an update with bated breath. I was a little surprised it's a little high, but also just feels like 40. How many games did they win last year? 41 wins.
41.
Just kind of breaks the system a little bit. It's just beyond Like it's meant to kind of regress everything towards the middle, and it's just like so beyond what they did. I didn't think even after that 1 year sample of seeing such an extreme result that the system would revert to kind of one logging that very clearly as like the White Sox true talent, but also just viewing that as like within the realm of regular possibility. And truthfully, I think it is. Like I think we've talked about this before. Like this White Sox team doesn't seem much better talent wise. Like if anything, as Jim was talking about in the PECOTA post, like there's some of the upward potential that they had, theoretically from Moncada and Eloy healthy season for Robert, that they don't really have anymore. It's just that the level of like bottom falling out everywhere incompetence that was required to get to where they got is still so beyond the norm that their true talent doesn't necessarily need to rise. They just kind of need to play to it a bit more to still see manager of the year potentially winning improvement, which he's sitting pretty, man. He's he's catbird seat, as they would say.
I just like out of the 1,000 simulations, Jim, not one has the White Sox finishing 500 or better. What was it, like 78? Just looking at the graph, like the one. Yeah. What a year that would be if we got to see the 99th percentile projection from PECOTA, where the Chicago White Sox in 2025 finished 78 and 84. And I was just thinking in my head, like, where would they have to be? Because in order to finish with that type of record, you assume that Luis Robert is still on your team, but you would have to be like in contention at the All-Star break to convince Jerry Reinsdorf and Chris Getz to not pursue a Luis Robert trade before the deadline. So if they're going to get to like 61 wins and meet this projection, they kind of have to have a fast start, right? Like they got to have a strong first half because it could, like we saw this past year, be really rocky post trade deadline.
Yeah, I think the runs scored column is going to be the determining factor. Like 631 runs, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it's 124 more than they scored last year. It was just, humiliating, I guess would be the best word for like the offensive output they had. The fewest runs since 1972, and that team had had pitchers hitting. Those 1972 Padres, like it's a terrible offense that has never been seen before, like over a 162 game season. And perhaps a little bit that can be attributed to the run environment because the entire league-wide offense was down. And so I'm curious, like, maybe 631 isn't necessarily the number, because if runs fall once again, then maybe something like 600 runs would be enough to get them out of historical historic awfulness and into just the realm of ordinary bad, like Marlins bad, Rockies bad. Nobody's parachuting in from New York or Los Angeles to write about what this team is doing levels of bad. So like that's, I think, what I'm looking at, because you can kind of see it if, Benintendi finally has a year that they thought they'd be getting from Benintendi, and Andrew Vaughn is decent, and the on-base guys get on base to provide more RBI opportunities for the guys who can hit, and maybe, they get a better catcher production, because last year's catcher production was, abysmal, and they have a few different options to go through. Like you can see ways that this offense is better, but it does take, I think, it's going to be a year-wide or a year-long process of scoring runs, because you mentioned if Luis Roberts hitting well, probably getting traded. And then what do you do after that? So it's going to take like a rolling set of circumstances of, almost like the White Sox in the Yermin Mercedes year, getting through DH, like Mercedes started, and then like Gavin Sheets kind of pitched in, and Jake Berger stepped up, and Jake Lamb got hot, and all these guys kind of patched together and sequenced a decent DH over the course of 6 months. I think it's going to take like that kind of effort to find maybe not primary contributors, but like secondary contributors who at least help the offense score 4 runs a game. Even like 3.7. But yeah, that's kind of what you're looking at here, I think, in terms of like the record. If they can't score runs again, then it just puts all the pressure on the starting pitching holding together when they're under innings workloads, and the bullpen being anonymous but good. That's when I think you can see the whole deck of cards, or the whole house of cards, I should say, fall over and just everybody get crushed.
Again, you can check out Jim's first thoughts about the PECOTA projections on SoxMachine.com. I'm sure the comment section will be lively, as always. And can't wait to get that Excel workbook from Baseball Prospectus to see. It's always fun to see, like, hey, what is the 99th percentile projection for Luis Robert? And then look at Andrew Vaughn's line, like, that's it for 99. And
slugging 501.
You're going to look back at last year's, right, Jim, and see where everybody ended up finishing?
Yeah, and just see what that would look like, I think, in 2025. I think that's kind of the idea I have right now. Just if they hit the same, what percentiles did they hit, and then what would that look like this year? What should we be steeled for is the takeaway as we try to protect ourselves from just being completely overwhelmed by just how bad everything was.
Everybody aim for their 40th percentile projection. Maybe the White Sox get to 61 and 101. The Sox Machine Fantasy Baseball League will be coming back for our Patreon supporters. This will be our third year of having 30 or more teams in the main championship league. But for the first time ever, we are introducing a 12-team roto style and a sub-league that feeds into the 32-team head-to-head league. We have multiple spots available for each league. So if you love playing fantasy baseball and you've always been curious about joining our 30-plus team league, check out the post on patreon.com/SoxMachine to learn more about the leagues and how to sign up. If you are not a Sox Machine Patreon supporter, visit patreon.com/SoxMachine to sign up today to enter the leagues. News elsewhere in Major League Baseball. This was some pretty big news. Umpire Pat Hoberg was fired by Major League Baseball, and technically he was fired this past May, but he challenged the case. But today, on February 3rd, it was official that he was fired, and he is not eligible to be reinstated until 2026 for sharing a betting account with a professional poker player. And a lot of reporting everywhere. Bob Nighy of the USA Today was the first one to tweet out that it was $700,000 involved. I don't know. James, do you know how much umpires make calling Major League Baseball games?
I believe it's under $700,000 a year.
Okay. All right. Safe to say. All right. So, yeah, most of those bets, though, according to the reporting, especially from the New York Times and The Athletic, where on other sports, Major League Baseball doesn't have any evidence proving that Hoberg, while umpiring games, placed bets on those games. I forgot the NBA referee's name that got busted for
Tim Donaghy.
Yes. Thank you. It's not one of those cases, but the professional poker player was definitely betting on baseball. Major League Baseball found out. And making matters worse, James, Hoberg deleted messages off of his phone. That seems to be the red flag here for Major League Baseball and Hoberg to go separate ways. And Hoberg, at least to the baseball scorecard folks that create those visuals on social media, was one of the better umpires in Major League Baseball. So kind of a blow as far as the umpires union, but is this just a smoking gun or just a one-off situation with Hoberg being fired for gambling?
Oh, no, I'm sure there won't be any more issues. They made an example out of him. Everyone saw it. Who wants to lose their job? So, yeah, gambling and sports, I don't expect any more malfeasance.
So we've lost a translator. A translator's going to prison. And now we've lost an umpire, Jim. Who's next?
A player. Obviously players.
A broadcaster, if you want to keep circling the periphery of the game.
Yeah.
Are they allowed to?
John Triffin, Vegas guy, right? There you go. Yeah, I imagine they have inside information, right? They are in the clubhouse. They're talking. So I would assume I'm not sure, if it's written into a union protection or something like that, but I imagine that would be pretty unseemly if they're betting on baseball while talking to guys and getting off the record information?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know. Is there anything written in the BBWAA about that, James?
My understanding is that we are not supposed to gamble on baseball. I don't have the letter of it in front of me. Okay. That's always been like my default. Like, I don't think they'd approve of this. I mean, I got like auto signed up for like an MGM account one time. I just like to my work address, and I freaked out for like 5 days trying to.
You deleted the paper trail.
I never signed up for this. Not only did I like delete my account, but like acknowledge that I never signed up for this, and like sending the messages and be like, yeah, please stop emailing us so frantically. Yeah, I'm just trying to think of a more interesting thing. I think someone with ownership stake would probably be the next like interesting breach of someone getting busted for sports gambling, since that is a not that narrow population, and also people probably aren't I want to say smart, because obviously they've gotten themselves well off financially, but maybe don't think in terms of like being held accountable for things as much as like the rest of the population.
Or like $700,000 being exchanged and being like, oh, that old thing?
Right, yeah. You get the vibe I'm going for.
That's, and Josh is a betting man. I'm not. So like, I think it's always interesting to like watch what you're doing, watch what Beefloaf's doing, just because that's not how my brain is wired, but watching how, advertising going and watching the money that's involved, like it's good to be aware of how brains are wired. And so just like, it's, when you see James's reaction, like, oh my God, MGM card in my email, delete, versus like Hoberg being like, I'm an umpire, but I'm going to share an account with my friend, and we're just going to kind of like send money back and forth. And that, like, and that not crossing the mind, it's either like one guy being dumb, which is possible, but it's probably all like just how invasive it is, or just like once you start betting, like you probably are more concerned with keeping tabs on, how many thousands you owe or are owed versus, bigger ramifications. Like, is this going to cost me my job or relationships, or am I going to get in trouble? But one thing, I was reading Jesse Rogers' description of the investigation findings, and one thing I will tip my hat to Pat Hoberg for was like, there's one bullet point saying Hoberg met his friend, identified as an individual A, at a poker tournament in 2014. They golfed, traveled together, and watched sports on TV. The friend was a frequent overnight guest at Hoberg's home in Iowa. I've never made that kind of friend after college. So like, hats off to him. Like, that they can still like build your network out like that. Like I thought it ended there. So like that's another thing I can't wrap my head around is like, just
did Rob Manfred consider this man's level of emotional availability when rendering fun?
Well, maybe Pat Hoberg could be a professional poker player. Public service announcement for those that do bet. Don't share betting accounts with anyone. Just don't do it. Not a good idea. The other thing too, like people, it's the amount of money that tips off sports books, and it definitely tips off the IRS as long as, however long that lasts. When you make a certain amount of money and you win a certain amount of money, it's very exciting. But those that have been doing it for a while, it's like, oh crap, I got to do paperwork. Now you got to report this type of income. Now there's a certain level of exposure. So to your point, Jim, like in this particular situation for Hoberg, like what was the thought process here? Because $700,000, like you betting $10 or $20 on an NFL game as a baseball umpire, I think that should be fine. But when you're in the six figures of betting, man, that's going to tip off everyone. I'd be constantly worried if I was Pat Hoberg, but it sounded like he wasn't until MLB caught scent of it back in May. And then he deleted messages, which pretty much makes you guilty. Like MLB had proof your friend using the shared account was betting on baseball, and we asked for messages between you two and you deleted them. So, well, that gives us no choice but to fire you.
Yeah, I mean, like the thing that is when you're having that much money go back and forth, like I would imagine all it takes is like one or two, maybe like 2 or 3 bad turns to where all of a sudden your role as a Major League Baseball umpire can help you get out of trouble, financially.
Absolutely.
So like that's, I think, what the league has to guard against. And like, hats off to him again, if he's able to compartmentalize his finances well enough to be like, yeah, it's never going to dip into my my professional life. No matter if I'm, if $700,000 is going back and forth, like I'm still calling balls and strikes as well as anyone. Like, I guess, I'm almost more impressed by him to a certain degree, but like, you can't keep that going. And I think, if you want to gamble that much, like, you just can't be that involved in the game. And it's startling. And I think it speaks to the pervasiveness of gambling and like, why it's such a menace to, and so, prone to addiction, that like you can have, a great career and be at the top of your game. But all of a sudden you're gambling so much that you're like, yeah, it's fine. It's fine. 5,000, 7,000, 10,000, 100,000, 700,000. Like it just, and it never clicks in terms of like, this could place my entire life in jeopardy.
I mean, just in the music scene, Bruno Mars, right? He, even though he has his residency out in Vegas, has gambled so much that he's put himself into a position like Elvis Presley. Like he has to continue the residency in Vegas because he owes MGM so much money.
Like washing the dishes, the dishes after having a meal he can't pay for.
Yeah, it's like he's now one of the most streamed artists on Spotify. And I think he posted something on social media. He's like, keep listening. One day I'll get out of debt. So that's why he's doing collaborations with everyone. Bruno Mars needs money. I don't know if Pat Hoberg needs money. I don't know who else in Major League Baseball needs money. But I think James is right. The next person that's going to get caught is going to be a minority owner. There's no doubt in my mind there are minority owners of the Chicago White Sox that are betting on the White Sox. Like, they have gone to Hammond, they have gone to the Horseshoe, and they have placed bets on how the White Sox are going to do. There's no doubt in my mind.
Betting on the White Sox?
Or maybe even against them. Like,
no,
we know we're going to suck.
No jury would rule against them.
Talk about your true believers. Yeah. Men of faith.
Yeah, I can imagine like somebody going to Rob Manfred, like, we have my White Sox minority owners bet against the White Sox. Like, who didn't? Oh, that means they're sane. Come back to me when you have something new.
Oh, well, we'll see when that does happen. Not if, when, but we've already had players being banned for life for betting, and now we have an umpire being fired for sharing a betting account. And then finally, old friend Dylan Cease, outstanding season in San Diego. And would think that he would be there again for a team that's hoping to contend in 2025. But it seems like with the ownership mess that the San Diego Padres have, and it is a messy situation, and it's impacting on how the Padres offseason has come along. They still haven't signed a free agent. They lost out on the Roki Sasaki sweepstakes because of this ownership fight. Jerkson Profar signed with Atlanta because San Diego is just a mess right now. And because of that messy situation, this upcoming spring training, Dylan Cease could get traded again. And James, this is a bit mind-boggling if this does occur, especially if you're in spring training, like even in mid-March again, if San Diego has no choice because of financial reasons, knowing that they can't sign Dylan Cease to a contract extension, like, I wonder what that does to Cease as far as preparation, because it's just so odd. Like, pitchers being traded in the offseason is nothing new, but to be traded in back-to-back spring trainings, like, that seems odd.
Baseball is doing one big heat check on whether they can make Dylan Cease look visibly uncomfortable. It's never been achieved, but this is the ultimate test. Part of, and alongside making jokes instead of real answers, but like if you perform during the 2022 White Sox, like it seems like he could, read a book while a plane's crashing next to him. Like he's operating in chaos. He's born in chaos. Like, this is what's comfortable to him.
I saw like a metaphor saying like somebody who can sit in the Costco food court on a weekend and enjoy a meal is somebody who can't be shaken. And Dylan Cease came to mind when I read that.
I can see him stopping at Costco for a hot dog on the way to a disc golf course for sure.
Sorry.
It's one, like, things were kind of, the die was kind of cast when he switched agents with Boris, like, and that absolutely, the fact that he's not someone seemingly desiring an extension so far, obviously makes him everyone kind of feel like they're in a little bit of we need to really be in, or like we need to get out sort of situation. But it's strange that he hasn't, I guess, been looked at as a potential centerpiece in a way, because he doesn't really fit the mold as like super reliable guy, but he's kind of the Iron Man of like modern pitching, which is like a situation where there is no Iron Man, and he still hasn't really even gotten close to 200 innings, and probably never will. It's just not what his like pitching style is. It would require him to like break to a new level of like hyper efficiency to do it. But this recent go round of like him actually pitching like big playoff games didn't really go particularly well for him, and it could speak to some level of like, or represent what might be an underlying cynicism, but like whether he's like truly elite or can like unhand elite lineups if he doesn't have like just like his best slider on a given day. But as far as like a reliable, projectable producer, he's been pretty like set your watch to it, especially in terms of maybe like the more stable measurables about strikeout rate, or just like the quality of his stuff maintaining. Like there was a little dip in 2023 that contributed to his ERA spiking, but his ERA spiked, I think, a lot more than he really deserved as far as like what the value of him as a pitcher is. I feel like it's been pretty stable year to year for a while now, so I feel like it's mostly kind of flukish that he's bounced around or potentially bounced around the way. I mean, you have an all-time implosion starting him to be traded, and then you have owner dying and subsequent lawsuit squabble between family. Like, you have two pretty like aberrant scenarios that result in him being on the move. So sorry, Dylan, this is the card you drew. I hope the $200 million are some sort of solace when they come down the road. But I don't know if that's worth not having stability. I guess he'll find out.
I also think he's kind of an unusual case in terms of like his demeanor, especially switching to Boris. He like never gives you an illusion that he would sign for a hometown discount. Not in a way like I'm going to sell myself to the highest bidder. Just more like, yeah, Chicago, great town, love it. Oh, San Diego, great town, love it.
Like it here. I would.
And whereas like watching Pete Alonso, like how tortured that is. Will he leave the Mets? Will he go to one of 7 other suitors who don't want to give him 4 years, and just he wants the Mets, and Steve Cohen's complaining about the way the negotiations are going, and you could see like how he just endeared himself to the fans and vice versa. And it's really tough to let go. Whereas Cease, while fans I think like him just fine, I think he's always able to keep everybody to remove and just the surroundings that are removed to where like that makes him effective, but also just I think it makes him very easy to detach himself, and maybe for teams to detach themselves from him, especially like if he has like the end that he had with the postseason last year, or just the inefficiency. I guess like the Padres also traded Juan Soto, which you don't often see when they're in position to succeed. So like they've done it before, where just like if there's an imperfect player and they feel like they can maybe pivot and turn that player into something else they can use equally as much, and then maybe just create something different with that position that they vacated, like they'll do it because that's kind of what Preller does. So perhaps it's just all these things kind of working in concert to make him or try to make him uneasy for an entire winter. But he's just probably playing disc golf. Probably just does he have courses now? Or
he does.
He's like co-invested on some courses
with
this Paul Macbeth guy who I think is popular in the disc golf genre, but
so kind of like the Mark Burley equivalent of like tending to his farm, going hunting. Like that's what Dylan Cease is doing with disc golf while the off season passes.
He's posted a lot of Instagram videos this off season of disc golf.
Yeah. So I imagine this got to be pretty nice. Just especially like if you don't have, I guess maybe he's also removed from the, he knows what he has to do. So there's not a case of showing up and like the other team that he, acquires him wanting to change his pitch mix. Like they're not going to say, stop throwing your slider or you should do something else. Like his mix kind of has worked for him. Now it's just a matter of like, maybe upping the efficiency, like 2% is maybe what you're looking at, unless he's talking about at the Padres Fan Fest, like trying to get a changeup that's not like a 20 mile per hour gap, completely just show me changeup, more of like an actual, arm speed matcher. And like, maybe they might do something, but really just about tweaking things on the margins because he kind of is what he is.
He seems like he's reached a stage of his career where he needs to like talk about working on the changeup every spring just to have something to talk about.
According to MLB trade rumors, the Chicago Cubs, Minnesota Twins, and New York Mets have been connected to Cease in recent days. Another old friend, Dan Hayes, reporting from a Twins perspective, the Padres are asking for quote-unquote significant major league value in return for Dylan Cease. All three of those teams could use Dylan Cease. It'd be kind of funny if he came back to Chicago, but in a Cubs uniform. That would be a very heavy trade-centric offseason for the Chicago Cubs after getting Kyle Tucker from the Houston Astros. And also they got Ryan Presley, didn't they? Did they not? They completed that deal?
Yep.
Yes. So we're still waiting, though, on some big names to finally sign, and we'll chat about those. Alex Bregman needs a home. Peter Alonso, as Jim mentioned, he needs a home. Nolan Arenado nixed the trade, but he still hasn't been traded, but he probably has to be traded before the season starts. So there's still some activity to be done, but we are ready for...
Flexen.
Chris Flexen. He's still out there. Can't call him an old friend because he might be a current friend, depending on how things go in spring training for the Chicago White Sox. But that will do it for this episode of the Sox Machine podcast. As again, we kick off Prospect Week, so continue to visit SoxMachine.com daily to check out as far as our reports and our analysis on the White Sox farm system. And that'll go throughout the week. And in just a week, James Fegan will be down in Glendale, Arizona, to cover the White Sox spring training as pitchers and catchers report officially on February 12th. But again, thank you so much for listening. If you just discovered the Sox Machine podcast, you can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to podcasts, such as Spotify and Apple Music. You can also listen and watch the show on our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Sox Machine. Follow us on social media. We're on all the platforms at Sox Machine. James is at JR Fegan, and I am at Sox Machine_Josh. If you enjoy our work and want full access to all of our coverage of the Chicago White Sox and Major League Baseball, sign up at patreon.com/Sox Machine, where monthly plans start at $5. You get an ad-free version of both the podcast and website. We also have other tiers of support as well. And what better time to sign up for an annual subscription right now to cover you for all of spring training and all throughout the regular season and get you taken care of going into the 2026 season. Then right now, again, you can go sign up at patreon.com/Sox Machine. The Sox Machine podcast is a production of SoxMachine.com. You're in for all things Chicago White Sox baseball and part of the Blue Wire Podcast Network. Alongside Jim Margulis and James Fegan, I'm Josh Nelson. Thanks for listening and watching.